Let's turn to our liturgy real quick. I'm going to read from the book of Leviticus for Old Testament liturgy, and from the book of what do I have? First Thessalonians for our New Testament liturgy. And I think for tonight, since we're in the fall feast, these are upon us now, I'm reading Leviticus 23, the first, say, maybe 4 verses, because they mention festival language. And then specifically, by the time you watch this video, since the Feast of Trumpets will have already been passed, in the First Thessalonian passage, I'm going to read from a passage that talks about the trumpet and things like that. And I'm going to do something a little different. I'll read, let's see, do I have time? I think what I will do is I will read only English. I was going to read English, Hebrew, English, Greek, but I think I'll read English only, and then next week I'll read Hebrew and Greek together. So let me change the version of the Bible real quick. Let me switch this over to ESV, and we'll just read this part. We'll read the first, like I said, just the first, I think 4 verses, which the reason I read 4 is the first 3 verses, the first 2 verses talk about the feast, then the 3rd verse throws in the Sabbath, and then the 4th verse picks up the feast again. So it's kind of jumps around a little bit, and that's why I'm reading it that way. So let me just read ESV. Like you can see on your screen, no Hebrew tonight. The Feast of the Lord, ESV, starting in verse 1 and 2 right there on your screen. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, that's verse 1. Verse 2, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, these are the appointed feasts of the Lord that you shall proclaim as holy convocations. They are my appointed feasts. Verse 3, starting with the Sabbath, keeping in mind that the feasts are also Sabbaths in and of themselves, but speaking out the 7th-day Sabbath, Moshe writes, 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. Verse 4, which starts up with the Passover, but I'm not going to read verse 5. Verse 4 says, these are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the appointed time for them, at the time appointed for them. And then he launches into an understanding of the Passover. And I should just drop all the way down and read verse 23 and 24 and 25. Where Moshe says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with a blast of trumpets, a holy convocation. Verse 25, you shall not do any ordinary work, and you shall present a food offering to the Lord. And we'll read more next week. We'll read the Hebrew equivalents of what I just read in the English, but that'll do it for our liturgy from the Tanakh. Let's turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. I was going to read English and Greek, but instead let me do the same thing that I did with the Tanakh. Just turn to the ESV. We'll read English only tonight. I'm only reading the last 4 verses of the chapter. There's so much I could say about this, but I want to keep the liturgy somewhat short. Starting in verse 15, we'll read down through verse 18. So 15, 16, 17, 18. Paul says, for this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. So the topic, of course, is we might talk about resurrection or something like that. Maybe rapture. We could use that word if you want to. But either way, he's talking about resurrection most definitely. And the thing that ties it into this time period that we're in is, look at verse 16. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, ready for this, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. There's our resurrection. But notice the trumpet, right? The sound of the trumpet, which connects it to the Feast of Trumpets, right? Rosh Hashanah on your calendar is probably what I was going to say, but the Bible calls it, in most places, the Feast of Trumpets. It is called Yom, the first of the year. I can't remember the Hebrew off the top of my head, but we'll look at that next week. We'll read those passages where the trumpet is sounded, the shofar is sounded. In this passage, it's not the same word for shofar, it's a Greek word for metal trumpet, but really doesn't matter so much so. We're still talking about the sound of a trumpet. Verse 17, Paul says, "Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." And then the final pasuk, verse 18, "Therefore encourage one another with these words." We'll read the Greek next week along with the Hebrew, but that'll do it for the liturgy for tonight.